This thing will follow you around. So the main thing is just making sure that you're close enough that it can hear you.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Faith Function today. Our teacher is Dr. Peter Gathje. I have your credentials written on my phone. Vice President, Associate Dean, and Professor of Christian Ethics at the Memphis Theological Seminary. We're thrilled to have him back. Are there any, next week is Janelle Baker, also from MTS. Are there any people we should be praying for in particular? Or any other announcements? Okay, let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come here together and learn more about your world and about your word. Please speak to us today, both in Sunday school class and at church. We ask for your blessings upon all those who are suffering, including those who suffer from poverty, those who are being affected by the pandemic. For all of your gifts, we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Daniel. Should be my phone. Probably about a car warranty. Well, it is great to be back. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last week. I was still a little bit under the weather from COVID. Had one of those wonderful breakthrough cases. My wife had it the week before, and I'm glad we were vaccinated, because even vaccinated, it's no walk in the park. So good to be here. And like I was saying, this is the first time I've been in a classroom with real live people in a couple of years. So it's nice to start with a small, friendly group. At least I hope you're friendly. So what I'm going to try to do today is talk about how we can be more civil, and what kind of attitudes and practices might we glean from the Christian practice of hospitality as to how to do this. And the reason I wanted to talk about this topic, besides the fact it's what I gave my paper on Friday at the conference that I was at, is that I've been thinking a lot, praying a lot about kind of the state of our society and even within our churches, and our seeming growing inability to even have conversation with people that we deeply disagree with. And this is certainly not a new issue. I mean, we've had conflict and disagreements and deep divisions in our societies going way back, probably since Adam and Eve, even if they're mythological. But I do think we're in a particularly dangerous time in our society, and the fault lines within our society are running right through our churches as well. Give you an example of this. We have we're recruiting students all the time to come to the seminary, and I can tell you the question that I get almost every time there's a prospective student on campus to talk with me is, are you liberal or are you conservative? And I hate those terms, especially within a kind of Christian setting. And I say, well, we're not either, because those are political terms, which are not even very well defined to begin with. But what we're trying to do here is follow the gospel. And if we're following Jesus, if we're following the gospel of Jesus, we're going to cut across those lines at various points, that we're not really liberal and we're not really conservative, we're Christian. Now that can be a kind of out, and I recognize that. But I think it does get to the point that as people of faith, we're supposed to, or we're called into a perspective that's not just tied to the way things are right now. We have a perspective that's shaped by a tradition that's over 2,000 years old, that we hope has remained grounded in Jesus Christ, who we believe is the Son of God, who is therefore speaking to us most directly from God, the creator of all of us. And we were kind of chatting at the beginning, what about those people who've never heard of Jesus, right? Well, there is something that's in various traditions gets called natural grace. And so God's activity in the world is always available to everybody. But we're blessed in a way by this revelation of Jesus. And so we should be called into a way of seeing things that's not bound and determined by the particular culture that we're part of, the particular race, gender, political party, whatever. We have a transcendent destiny. And so our perspective on things should be a little bit different as well. So as I've been thinking about this, about the kind of working within the divisions and trying to not keep contributing more and more to the divisions, started thinking about kind of the work that we do at Manna House, this place of hospitality that I help to run with lots of other people, that works with people on the streets, all sorts of different kinds of people, who come for a variety of reasons, coffee, showers, just a place to hang out for a while, but for everybody really seeking a place where they're welcomed. And not everybody who comes there is the same. There's different races, classes, gender, sexual orientation, you name it, there's lots of difference. And most of the time, we get along pretty well with each other. Not always, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I started thinking, well, if we get along so well most of the time, how is that? What are we bringing to the table, so to speak, that allows that to happen? So as a teacher, I like to use kind of memory devices to help my students remember what I talked about, because it's easy when you walk out the door. It's like it's the Sunday sermon syndrome. 20 minutes after the Sunday sermon, somebody says, "What was the sermon?" I don't remember. Even if it was a great sermon, you remember that. Oh, it was a great sermon. Yeah, what was it about? I don't know. So my memory devices for today are 4 L's. That I'm going to get out of the practice of hospitality that should help us to address, not solve, but start to help us to address how we approach people with whom we deeply disagree. So I'm going to say the 4 L's, and then we'll go through each one, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So L number 1 is love. L number 2 is listening. L number 3 is learning. And number 4 is limits. And there'll be a quiz at the end of the day. What are those 4 L's? So love, listening, learning, and limits. And I want to propose that all 4 of these are somewhat countercultural. In other words, if we're going to practice these and enter into these, we're going to find ourselves up against the broader culture, which is not encouraging us to do any one of those 4 on a regular basis. And because we live in that culture, they're also counter my personality or my attitudes too. That is that these are challenges for me to do. And I'll talk particularly with love about how challenging that one is, but they're all difficult. And I don't think they're things that we just sort of do naturally. And that's why we have to practice them. We have to be intentional about them. And that's why I like the 4 L's, because it's also kind of like an examination of conscience for me. How did I do today with love? How did I do today with listening? How did I do today with learning? And how did I do today with limits? So that tomorrow I might be able to do slightly better. Because that's how we get better at things, right? Anybody in here a musician? An athlete? Just a human being? Right? And you know the way you get better at something is by practicing it, doing it day in and day out. In the field of Christian ethics, that's called developing good habits. And good habits lead to something called virtues. And virtue is simply a word that means excellence. So becoming better human beings. So we have to practice these. The only way we can practice them is be intentional about them and keep at them. So let's start with love. Love in the practice of hospitality is mostly put into practice through something that we can call respect and recognition. And respect has various theological foundations. The basic one for us as people of faith is that we believe that every single human being is made in what? God's image, right? The image of God. So every single person in this room, as we look at that person, there is something of God in that person. And of course in ourselves as well, right? This is a radical affirmation of our dignity as human beings. And this dignity never can go away or be destroyed. So even when we're at our worst, and I have some bad days sometimes where I'm not working real well as a human being, I can rest assured that at least God still loves me. I'm made in God's image. That's a fundamental assertion, statement of faith on our part, that we see something of God in every single human being that we encounter. So if we're in like a Black Baptist church, I'd say turn to your neighbor and say, "Good morning, God." But I won't make you do that because you're Presbyterian, right? But that's what we can say each morning when we see somebody. We have to remind ourselves, "Oh, yeah, that's somebody who's made in the image of God. That is a holy person." This is really hard to do. But it's what Jesus was getting at as well when he said in Matthew 25, "Whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me." So how you welcome the stranger, how you feed the hungry, give water to somebody who's thirsty, visit the sick or the imprisoned, you are engaged in a sacramental practice because you are in the very presence of Christ. It's another way to talk about the image of God in each person. Jesus was very emphatic about this. And it's a strong story. It's, Jesus doesn't tell a lot of judgment stories, but this is one of his judgment stories. How will you be judged? How will we be judged as a people? Because it's called the judgment of the nations. It's how we are able to address each other as made in the image of God, as the very presence of Christ for us as Christians in that person. So how does this get fed? Well, it gets fed by prayer and participating in a community of worship. I don't think this comes naturally. It certainly doesn't come naturally to me to see every single person and to treat every single person with this kind of deep respect and to recognize their dignity as human beings. So I've had guests at Manor House sometimes come up to me after we've had kind of a rough morning. And I said, "How do you do this?" I said, "Well, the only way I'm able to do this is through prayer, through taking the time to be in the loving presence of God so that I can hopefully fulfill a basic commandment from Jesus. In John's gospel, Jesus gives this new commandment. Does everybody remember what that new commandment is? Yeah, we're even beyond that. We're supposed to love others as God has loved us. And that, my friends, is no easy task, right? It's why Jesus says, "I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit." Because Jesus knows, God knows, we can't do this on our own. We would have a very difficult time, near impossible, probably isn't possible to do this on our own. Now, an important part of this respect and recognition as well, then, is that since the fundamental human identity is that we are made in the image of God, we resist defining anybody by whatever group they might belong to, or whatever identity they may present to us. because those kind of group identities sometimes are what divide us. Like, well, you're a Trump Republican, or you're a Democrat, or you're a Vikings fan, or you're a Cowboys fan. And actually, last night I was at this dinner and somebody got up and started talking about the Cowboys. And there were boos, sort of lighthearted, but not really, because they were Steeler fans. Right? And those kinds of divisions that can be as trivial as sports identity, but they're not that trivial, right? Alabama versus Auburn, right? Or, we see what happened at the Tennessee game a couple of weeks ago. People who are taking the game so seriously that they were willing to harm other human beings, including their own cheerleaders and band, by expressing their displeasure, by throwing stuff. That's they forgot, which we all do from time to time. They forgot that the people on the field, including the referees, are made in the image of God. So when they were throwing bottles and golf balls and all of that, they were throwing them at God. Now, I'm sure there's some real good Christians in that audience, but they forgot, like I forget, quite regularly. We see this in terms of race, sometimes social class, gender, sexual orientation, that we overly identify a person with a group, or we ourselves overly identify with a group, and we end up, in a sense, dehumanizing people because we're forgetting that they're made in the image of God. Now, this is especially dangerous for us if we're interacting with people on social media, like on Facebook. I see memes that are dehumanizing. So like just the other day, it was Friday, I saw this meme. It was kind of funny, right? But it's dehumanizing. There's a quote from Shakespeare that's something about hell hath been emptied and the earth is full of devils. And don't ask me what Shakespeare that's from, but anybody in here know? Anybody Shakespeare scholars? I'm assuming it really was Shakespeare. Yep. Okay. I'm assuming it really was Shakespeare, because you never know about these memes, but it said William Shakespeare. And then there were pictures. Now, this is one of my Facebook friends. So most of my Facebook friends are kind of liberal left. Not all of them, because I keep a few around to remind me that they're made in the image of God. But, I'm serious. So the pictures with this meme that, hell hath been emptied of the devils and they're all wandering the earth now, was all Republican leaders. Mitch McConnell, Trump was on there, et cetera. And I thought, ha, 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 wait a minute. That's dehumanizing. That's saying that they're demonic. And they may be really wrong on the policies that they're advocating for, but they are made in the image of God. And so I'm called by Jesus Christ to continue to love them. That doesn't mean I need to like them. There's a difference, right? I don't even know them, so how can I really like them? But I'm called to treat them with respect as human beings. And that is not easy. So if you want to read a great old book about somebody who tried to do this, I recommend Will Campbell, Brother to a Dragonfly. A lot of you are shaking your heads, you already read it. And I'd read it a number of years ago when I was getting ready to do this paper, and it popped into my head, kind of brainstorming as you're writing something. And I need to reread that book. So I did. And I had forgotten just what a great storyteller Will Campbell is. But he's talking about his own life as a white Southerner in the 1950s and 60s primarily. And Will Campbell was a white Baptist minister who became famous when he was at Ole Miss as the chaplain, because he stood in favor of the integration of Ole Miss. which was no, small thing to do as a white guy. So, but what he realized as he went through the civil rights struggle is that, yeah, he'd made the right decision to stand with African Americans in the struggle for civil rights. But he had made a mistake as well, because he had stopped listening and learning, because he had stopped respecting, loving his brothers and sisters who were white, who were on the other side. That they had a story too that he had stopped listening to. And he tells the story really powerfully about, he had an uncle who was probably part of the Klan. And so his uncle had basically and he just had no time for each other. And then Will Campbell's mother died. So this guy's sister. And Will's, after the wake, he's just keeping watch through the night. And about an hour or so into that, he hears a voice in the darkness other than the candle by the casket. And it's the voice of his uncle. He's in the room and he's saying, "How are you doing? You need anything?" And what Will writes about is that for him, that became the voice of Jesus. Now, he's not justifying at all Klan activity. He's not saying that's right. What he's saying is that God can even speak to us through our enemies, through the people that we have denigrated, that we've denied their dignity. And then, in fact, God comes to us through those very strangers. And why does God do that? Because God likes to mess with us. Because God is God, and we're not. And so the way in which we continually encounter God as other is through the people who are most other in our lives. And again, this is sort of, lets us sink in through times of prayer. So as I'm thinking about hospitality, for example, this is all grounded in this practice of hospitality. I've come to realize that in order to do hospitality, in order to practice this first kind of love, I have to become kind of a mystic. And what I mean by that is that I have to be able to, through the gracious presence of God in my life, I have to get this vision of being able to see people consistently as made in the image of God. And that's mysticism. Because the ordinary world, as I just sort of look out in the world, there's just a lot of, part of my language here, but there's just a lot of assholes. A lot of people who are acting very badly, especially from my perspective. And, we could make a list, I'm sure, of people we deeply disagree with politically, economically, culturally, ethically, etc. We can make that list of sort of our enemies list. I am called, you are called, as followers of Jesus, to see them as God sees them. And that's mysticism. So that's our first challenge, is to love, not in this sort of, romantic or sentimental sort of kind of love. Those are fine kinds of love, but that's not the kind of love we're being called to here. It's the kind of love that gets manifest in respect and recognition. Now, how do I do that concretely? So I have the vision, right? One way I do that concretely is by listening. So we're going into the second L. And I'm going to read something from the Rule of St. Benedict. The first word in the Rule of St. Benedict, which is the foundation for Western monasticism, in Latin, is abscolta. And it means listen. That's how the whole rule of St. Benedict begins, is with the word listen. And I chose the chose to think about this because the rule of St. Benedict, one of its chapters is about hospitality to the stranger, to the guest who comes to the monastery. And the whole rule really flows out of this one word of listen. Now, I also found this Benedictine writer, and sort of funny in a way, because unidentified other than a Benedictine nun, right? So a female monk. This is what she wrote. There is nothing casual or half-hearted about this kind of listening. It requires close attention, hard work, care. It means more than just absorbing words. It must embrace nuance, intention, and the subtleties that can easily escape us today when we are used to scanning at high speed or rushing to add our own contribution before we have fully grasped the meaning of what we have just heard. We are too full of our own noise to listen properly. We are too full of our own noise to listen properly. I think about how when I'm on Facebook, that's what I do. I scan really quickly. I don't read. I mean, if anything's more than a paragraph, that's too long. I can't read that, all right? Twitter encourages this kind of behavior as well. Because in Twitter, you're limited to what, 160 or 180 characters? What can you say in 180 characters? Nothing of importance. So we're encouraged by the kind of the social media that we interact with to be skimmers, not listeners, and to be mostly about what I want to say rather than about listening. And I see this even, I'm not even on Twitter anymore because it seems so worthless to me. But I'll see these headlines sometimes like so-and-so said this and Twitterverse erupted. And then the whole article is just screenshots of what other people said. And it's a kind of race to the bottom to see how insulting can they be in response to what this other person said on Twitter. That's part of the problem. And so what I need to do is not be engaged with that, because it's encouraging me not to listen in a careful way. So listening is hard work. It's one of the things in the clinical practicum, which is one of the classes that all of our Master of Divinity students are required to take. They have to go to a ministry setting like a hospital or a manor house or a prison, and they are supposed to offer and learn how to offer some kind of pastoral care. You know what the main thing they're really supposed to learn? To listen, to shut up and listen. That the best form of pastoral care is not telling somebody, oh, don't feel that way. In fact, that's a horrible form of pastoral care, but to listen for what the person's actually saying. I'll give you an example from my own work at Manor House. We were inside the house, this was a number of years ago before the pandemic, and there was a guest in the house who was upset with another guest, and a fight was basically breaking out. And I stepped into the middle of the two guests who were arguing, and because their voices were raised, I raised my voice, right, to try to get their attention, right? So it's a reasonable thing to do. And the one guest that sort of worked, he just walked away, but the other guest then started yelling at me. So pretty soon I'm yelling louder, he's yelling louder, and my wife, Kathleen, comes up to me and she says, "Why don't you shut up?" She's real subtle that way. And I looked at her and I was angry at her. It's like when you get between a fighting couple, then you get angry at the person who's breaking up your fight. So I sort of forgot about the guest and I started getting angry with her. And then I thought, she's right. I need to shut up. And as soon as I shut up, Kathleen started talking with this guest quietly. And the next thing you know, he's going out the door. on his own. He's not being forced out or anything. And I learned something that day about the importance of shutting up. That sometimes we're just going to escalate what's going on by stopping. We've stopped listening. And what we're mostly concerned about, what I was mostly concerned about, was getting my point across. And that's exactly the worst thing I could have been doing. And so listening is our second L. And when I start to listen really well, that's when I move into the third L, which is learning. It's kind of hard to learn without listening. What am I learning? Well, learning is about being open to the possibility that the other person is actually speaking some truth. Now remember, they're made in the image of God. So there is always that possibility that they're speaking some truth. They might even be speaking some truth that is distorted, that is incomplete, but that I still need to hear because I'm distorted and incomplete. And so at Manna House, I try to listen to people's stories. And sometimes I've learned. Now, I don't always learn, but often I do learn from these stories. And I've learned a lot about homelessness because I've never been without shelter. I've always had a roof over my head. So I've learned about the realities of being on the streets, which is an important thing to learn because it undercuts a kind of judgmentalism about, oh, you know, people on the streets are just lazy, worthless, etc. It undercuts that stuff because I start to learn what led somebody into homelessness, and almost always what led them into homelessness was poverty, that they didn't have any choice about anyways. They're born into poverty. There weren't much of a social safety net around the person, and then one crisis in their lives and boom, they're out on the streets. I've also learned a lot about addiction. I've learned a lot about mental illness. I've learned a lot about human generosity, even in the midst of scarcity. Because if you want, I mean, one of the most amazing things to me is how much people on the streets share with each other. Stuff and information and respect with each other. I've learned a tremendous amount. I've learned about how the police are not always your friend. You know, because when I grew up, you know, my parents basically told me, if you're in trouble, call a cop. And what I learned is that's not true for everybody. I've learned that some police can be really good people and some can be not so good. And that they're encouraged sometimes to harass homeless people out of certain areas. I've learned all that from people on the streets. I've learned about what it's like to be a transgender person. And just phenomenal learning on my part. I've learned about what it means to be homosexual and how hateful so many Christians can be, including so much that, I mean, one of the people that I learned from at Manna House was a guy who stopped me on the front porch once and said, "Where can I go to church where I'll be loved for who I am?" That was the question. And I said, and then I was like, well, what do you mean? You can go to any church, right? So no, my daddy, who's a minister, that's the reason I'm on the streets. I'm gay. And I got thrown out of the house when I was 16. And I've been on the streets ever since. And I don't want to go to that kind of church, but I feel like I have this need for God. Where do I go? And so, I said, I don't know. Try First Congo. I think that might be a good place to start. And then person said, would you pray for me? And see, I was raised Roman Catholic. And in my tradition, we don't pray except with a book. I'm kind of serious. Right? Spontaneous prayer makes me real nervous. right? What Daniel had to do at the beginning, I'm so glad he's just prayed and didn't ask me to, get up and pray. I'm getting better at it, but I said, no, I won't pray for you. I'll pray with you. So we held hands together on the porch and I said everything, but we prayed. And that was part of my conversion to being welcoming and affirming. And the conversion had already started a number of years before, but that kind of clinched it. That just what are we about as disciples of Jesus Christ if we can't love people for who they are? Seems pretty basic, but Jesus even gave us a commandment, remember? We're supposed to love each other as God has loved us. And God doesn't stop loving anybody. So I've learned that. I've learned from white guests about how they're taught to consider themselves failures because they know that they're in a political and economic and cultural system in which white people are generally favored over everybody else, especially white men, are favored, and yet here they are homeless. I mean, what kind of failure must you be to fail in a system that's set up for you to succeed? That's what they've been taught. And then they go to the Union Mission, and they're taught that they're on the streets because they don't love Jesus enough, which is just a theological way of saying you're a failure because of your fault, not because there's a system that might be problematic. And so to listen to those stories and to hear the self-loathing of people, white men who are on the streets, has been very instructive for me. I've learned a lot. So we've got love, listening, learning, and that's part of what I try to do on like Facebook or other places too, is I need to hear the stories of the people with whom I disagree. And this is hard work because people's stories sometimes are really wacko. It's just, from my perspective, you're just wrong. So, but to discipline myself to not respond, to not do a Facebook argument, but to just read what the person says and to let it sink in and think about it. And then Facebook's just you can't really have much community there. But what about for a student in my class? Because I had a student in my class once who was trying to argue, this was at the seminary. She was trying to argue that pornography is a good thing. That's just stupid. And I said, in my head, I was saying, that's just stupid. What I forced myself to say was, can you tell me more about that? And here it was, she told me more, and it was still stupid. But I started to see where the distortion was coming from. And it was coming from actually a good place, which is she was trying to say that women in our culture, some women in our culture have found their involvement in the pornography business as a way to acquire wealth and therefore respect. I've never really heard that argument before. I certainly don't agree with that that's a good path to respect. But we got into then, why is it that in our culture, women may see that as a choice? And maybe it's not a choice, but, in the sense of that there aren't other available choices. So we had a very rich discussion that came out of that. It all started actually with John Wesley saying there are some forms of work that are just vicious. So, but listening helps me to learn. Now we'll go to the last L, and then hopefully we'll have a little time for some questions and discussion. The last L is limits. You probably all had an experience in your life where you've had a guest who's worn out their welcome. It's like, are you ever gonna go? That's a limit, right? Sometimes it's a limit of time. Sometimes it's a limit of patience. For us, sometimes, I mean, we're open 2 days a week right now, Monday and Thursday mornings. That's it. So we're hospitable for about 6 hours a week. That's all we can take. Right? So there's a limit there. We limit the number of people who can come in to shower, get a change of clothes. We limit how many people get what we call socks and hygiene. We also have some very basic limits of no denigrating, degrading, dehumanizing, or disgusting language can be used amongst each other, to each other at Manor House. And if you persist after you've been asked to stop, you'll be asked to leave. And if you're asked to leave and you won't leave, that happens occasionally, then we shut down. And everybody's asked to leave. When everybody leaves, that usually diffuses, like the person just standing there is like, okay, I'll leave. But there's also, they're going to have to answer on the streets as to why they closed down Manor House. So, but we have these limits. We can't serve everybody everything that they want all the time. We won't cooperate with behavior that is harmful to other human beings. I forgot to say when I was talking about listening and learning that humility and humor are helpful in both of those. But humility and humor do not lead to, or not the pretext for humiliation. So we don't allow for humiliation to go on. There's a quote from James Baldwin that is helpful here, I think. See if I can find it. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. See, that's where we run up against a limit, right? If somebody's trying to kill me, whether directly or indirectly through certain public policies, then I have to stand up against that wrongdoing. And what I'm urging here is not, kind of everything goes, but trying to figure out ways in which we can disagree and resist without being hateful, right? Because we're called to love. And to know that we are going to be up against people we disagree with, that's a recognition of human limits, of fallibility, of finiteness on our part. And limits are also a recognition of that we fail from time to time. But that's just part of our reality as human beings, that we're going to fail. Hospitality doesn't always work. Loving, listening, and learning does not always mean that we're going to have a mutually transformative and good relationship that develops. That's a hard truth for us, especially those of us who are kind of liberal types. We like to think like, well, if we just have a better argument or a better discussion, we'll get to the reality, the truth. And I think what we're recognizing in part today is that there are people who are, I'm going to use a fancy term, epistemically, that's their knowledge, their ability to know, that they're epistemically vicious. That is, that they believe stuff that's just blatant lies. They don't do their homework. They jump into conspiracy theories. They're lazy. Right? And we should know all this because it's all true about us too. Right? I mean, we all can be epistemically vicious as human beings. But if there's somebody who is being epistemically vicious, the best that we can do sometimes, not all the time, sometimes we can love, we can listen, we can learn, But sometimes the best thing that we can do at a certain point in a relationship is to walk away and just say, I'm not going to listen to that today. I'm done. You've hit my limit. All right. You've worn out your welcome. I can come back tomorrow maybe, and let's try it again. But for now, we're just going to stop. That's like us asking a guest to leave. You've worn out your welcome. Your continuation with this kind of behavior is threatening our ability to continue to be hospitable with each other here. And so you've been asked to leave. And when that happens as an overall society, that's a really horrific thing, because that can lead to something like a civil war. But what we're hoping is that if we practice these 4 little L's consistently in our relationships with each other, we can start to sort of knock away gently but persistently at the divisions that are going on in our society. We can refuse to participate, at least, in the worsening of those divisions. And that's no small thing for right now. So I've done a lot of talking. You've done a lot of listening, maybe some learning. You've probably reached your limit. And so let's have some conversation for a few minutes.
About 13 minutes.
About 13 minutes. Okay. Questions, comments, observations? Yes, ma'am.
With what you were saying at the beginning, there's a line in a Faulkner novel, and I think it's As I Lay Dying, but I wouldn't swear to that, where this, if you know anything about the people that Faulkner wrote about, they're just absolute scum of the earth.
Yes.
Excuse my expression. And these people are involved in something, obviously just distraught over the death of someone. And the line is that there's a heart capable of breaking where it had no business being. And I taught for a long, long time, and I had students that I would have pegged as troublemaker, worthless, lazy, stupid, and something would happen, and I would think, there's a heart capable of breaking where it had no business being.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just thought that's what you were talking about reminded me of.
Thank you very much, because that's a much more poetic way of putting it, right? And I think it's really powerful. And it gets to the reality, I think, that we're all carrying brokenness, that we all are hurting. And that's, for me, is a kind of foundation for compassion, which is a requirement for listening and learning. So yes, thank you. Another person who kind of gets at this, another great Southern writer, he's really just a great writer, right? I mean, Faulkner's just a great writer, but Flannery O'Connor, in the way in which these sort of monstrous characters reveal to us something of the truth of the human condition. And I think that's part of what, the way she writes is to get that point across. And it's a fundamentally gospel point that we should get. I mean, if we think of like who we worship, who our Savior is somebody who was completely rejected and killed by the powers that be of the time. And the powers that be of that time are no really different than the powers that be of this time. And those powers that be are trying to convince us that we need to hate other groups of people. You need to hate people who are part of other groups. And they divide, and that's how we stay divided. And division works to the benefit of the most powerful. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I needed to hear this today. That's an individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do we apply this to the great outside world of the divisions that are happening?
Mm-hmm. Most excellent question. I think we apply them as best we can within the constraints of that world. And so even in political life, for example, I'm called to, and I'm empowered by God's grace to listen. So what are Republicans trying to say today? And I'm not talking about like, the leading Republicans. I'm talking about like our friends who might be Republicans, if we still have some, or our acquaintances or our relatives, that we can listen. If we listen, what are their deep concerns? And maybe there's some validity in some of those deep concerns, but their policies are misguided. I don't know. I mean, and I think it's going back to that James Baldwin quote. This is not a call. I hope you wouldn't walk out of this room thinking, well, he's telling us to cooperate with evil. That's exactly what I'm saying don't do. But we have to learn how to resist evil without becoming the evil that we're resisting. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. It's Romans chapter 12, verse 21. Even a Catholic can quote the Bible. So how do we do that in terms of, say, like the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party? The Democrats have to be careful to not get sucked into a sort of tit for tat. And I think that's what we're seeing, like at our national level quite often, is that it's just a sort of war of all against all, to quote Thomas Hobbes. And what we have to try to figure out is, how might we find some common ground? And I can tell you, we're not going to find any common ground if we don't listen. Now, and I know there are people out there and groups of people who are not open to any point of view except their own. And I know that because I feel that temptation myself. So we're going to be called in the midst of that to continue to the best of our ability to present an alternative, as we also keep trying not to demonize those we're opposed to. Let me give you a historical example of how this worked. World War II. The United States of America and the Allies utterly defeated both Nazi Germany and the Japanese Empire. And then what did the United States government and its allies do after the war? The Marshall Plan, the rebuilding. And partly perhaps because they learned from the aftermath of World War I, where there wasn't that kind of work that was done to help rebuild, and it led to Hitler. So that was, to me, is a kind of a grace moment in the nations. And we have to remember those stories. The utter vanquishing of our enemies is going to create ill will that's going to lead to some problems down the road. So we got to resist the worst tendencies in our hearts and in our public policies to try to get utter victory. I think of this like on the abortion issue, which is certainly one that's dividing people and political parties. And the Republicans have been masters at using this as a wedge issue. And the Democrats, the Democratic Party, seems incapable of listening to the deep moral concern that's underneath the Republican Party posturing, which is, how do we become a society in which new life is welcomed? And this is the Democrat side coming in to say, and in which the dignity of women is fully affirmed and welcomed. See, that's the question we're not asking. The Republicans are not asking that, and the Democrats are not asking that. They're just fighting at the surface. Whereas I'll give you a book you can read if you want. It's an old book now. Kristen Luker, L-U-K-E-R. And she wrote a book quite a while back called The Politics of Motherhood. And what she found out, she's a sociologist, she talked with people, women who were pro-life and women who were pro-choice, and she listened very carefully, and what she discerned in that listening was some incredible common ground. Not on the abortion issue specifically, but upon the place of women and the welcoming of new life within our communities. And that's the kind of conversation we just don't have. And we're certainly never going to have it on Facebook or on Twitter, right? So, but can we have it maybe in a church or in a classroom? Those kinds of conversations and seeking of some kind of common ground can only happen though if we have these kind of commitments to love and listening and learning and still recognizing our limits. Does that get to your question? No.
I know where it's going, but I'm still thinking about the great outside world.
Yeah, the great outside world is in trouble. And so what we have to try to do is model a different way. And it may take a while for that model to be transformative of the whole society. But if we don't start somewhere, we're never going to get anywhere. And that's kind of the kind of all or nothing. That's a refusal to accept our limits. And so we just have to humbly say, I am not going to change this society today or tomorrow. But if I consistently live with others in a way that's an alternative, we may be transformative over time. Right. That's the best I think we can do.
We have 2 notes from Zoom.
Okay.
One is from Peggy. This is an outstanding class, should be heard by more people than in this classroom. Is there any way you could preach this at Idlewild or come back and if we can get you a larger audience to hear this?
Oh, I'm always happy to speak to a larger audience. I like small audiences because it's easier to have some conversation.
And then Minna has her hand raised and is unmuted. So,
Okay.
Sure.
Hey,
Can you
Minna.
hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I just, a hymn that has meant a lot to me recently, and I can't sing it, sorry about that, is O Zion, haste, thy mission high fulfilling. Let's see, to tell to all the world that God is light, that he who made all nations is not willing one soul should perish, lost in shades of night. And I don't remember the rest of it, but that has stuck with me. I think we should remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing us back to a really important point for me, is that we can't do these things without encouraging each other in the midst of a community that's committed to this and praying and worshiping together. Because we get those glimmers of God's insight in the hymns and in the prayers, but we also see it in our churches when our churches are at their best, because I've got a feeling that Idlewild Presbyterian has not always been a place where everybody agrees with each other. I have this sense, because you're a church, right? And one of the good things about church is that it can draw people together who are not the same. And unfortunately, what's happening in our churches is that our churches aren't churches anymore. They're lifestyle enclaves. And that's when we look around and everybody in the church is just like us. We got to get out of that church, or we've got to get other people into that church who are not like us. There's a great metaphor in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians of the body of Christ. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. He also uses it in Romans 12. And the body of Christ is a great metaphor for the church and really for even a broader society, because what Paul is saying is that we can't all be the eye, we can't all be the leg or the thumb or whatever. We need each other in our differences in order to work together to be the body. And of course, Paul's making a zinger kind of point too, because he says, the members of that body that are the most objectionable, or he says the most dishonorable, are the ones that we need to protect the most. That's kind of groin theology. And he's talking about, right, that those members of the body that we think are sort of like the most disgusting or the ones that we need to, cover up, are the very ones who are revealing to us something of God. And that's how we're called, as Paul says, then to treat those members of the body with the deepest respect. Or as I say to my students, you're not going to kick Christ in the groin, are you? All right? So, and that's what we're trying to learn together, how to love in that way. And a good place to learn that kind of love, and hopefully a somewhat safe place to learn that kind of love, and the listening and the learning and the limits, is a church. So not all churches are safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, bye, everybody. See you guys next week.